My name is David Newhart. I was raised in Copley, Pennsylvania. And in that church, as I was raised as a young man, I had a congregation that had both English and German services. So every other Sunday, as a young boy, they had services in German at 8 o'clock. And that's going to figure into something I'm going to tell you a little bit later on. But I thought you should know that. When I came home from college on different occasions, I would assist the pastor in those German services. Alfred Koch was his name, and Alfred was getting kind of old and having his troubles in reading. And so I usually read the lessons and then began to do the entire liturgy. I never preached in German for him, but I did do the liturgy. Then I went off to Philadelphia Seminary after graduating from Susquehanna University in Selinsgrove. And I was there from 1966 through 1970 when I was ordained. My internship in 1969 was probably one of the most interesting of all internships in the entire LCA at the time. I was called to a parish in New York City, 54th and Lexington on Manhattan, St. Peter's Lutheran Church. The National Church had decided they were going to pour money into that particular congregation to make it a showplace church for the Lutheran Church. Worked with John Genzel, who had a ministry to jazz musicians, and consequently I met a number of very famous jazz musicians, including Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Louis Armstrong. I can't think of any more right off the top of my head. But the other thing I did there, and this was probably the reason I was called there, and I think my professor, Martin Heineken, had something to do with me being called there, was they had a small, very small theater in the basement of that church. That was a noonday theater. And so our noonday theater ran shows twice in the same day for 45 minutes. And we had a variety of things. Sometimes we had short plays. Sometimes we had musicals. Sometimes we had comedians, a whole variety of things. And I became the guy that went out to seek out and find the entertainment for the noonday theater. So the other thing is, as far as running the theater was concerned, I met a lot of interesting people. I met Dustin Hoffman right after he had done Mrs. Robinson. I had met a man called Donald Pleasance, that by his name you may not know him, but he became famous as a character actor in a number of the Halloween movies. He was the psychiatrist. Donald Pleasance was a very interesting character. He was doing a show on Broadway called The Man in the Glass Booth. And with them, there were 4 men that were served as guards. The Man in the Glass Booth was about Eichmann and his trial. And these were 4 soldiers that were sort of just kind of like extras on the set. But they put together a show and came and did that show at my place. And one of those men was F. Murray Abrams. Now, you may not know who F. Murray Abrams is, but F. Murray Abrams was the guy that played Salieri in Amadeus, the man who claimed he killed Mozart. James Earl Jones I met while I was there as well. An interesting man. Geez, I can't remember them all, but I just had an interesting time as an intern. And I think because of that, then I was called to Washington, D.C. to be with John Steinbrook at Luther Place Memorial in downtown Washington. And there I spent some time initially working with the young people. There was a very well-known coffee house in Washington called the Iguana. The second summer I was there, one of the big peace movements came to Washington. And our little tiny downstairs in the basement of the church coffee house got filled with people, and they kept on coming, and they kept on coming, and we had to find a place for them to sleep. So we took them up. We had 3 stories of classrooms in the building that weren't being used. We no longer had any children in the congregation, and so we put them up overnight, up until about 4 o'clock in the morning. Now we had taken in, and weren't quite sure, but we knew there were probably 800 people or more. And we decided we were going to try and feed these people. So I'm meeting with all the people that were involved in the coffee house. Because of what happened, members that were regularly there called up people that used to come, and we got a whole slew of people. We probably had about 40 people coming to work at the coffee house that day. And so we talked about, what are we going to do? Can we feed these people? And the little, tiniest, quietest mouse of a girl says, I think my daddy can help. They said, oh, okay, who's your dad? Well, he owns the biggest dairy in Washington, D.C. She said, yes. Called up her daddy. He sent down a truck full with eggs, bread, butter, bacon, and milk. And we fed almost 900 people. Started waking them up at 6 o'clock in the morning and bringing them down in groups, pushing them through. We had nothing but regular dishes, so we had to wash the dishes and keep on frying up the eggs and the bacon and everything. And believe it or not, we fed those people. Got them out of there because church was at 8:30. By 8 o'clock, the place was empty. They had policed up the outside and cleaned up the sidewalk and the grass and everything. It looked like it had never looked that good before. And so we were very, very happy. It was an interesting time, an interesting moment in Washington. But my other story about Washington is probably something for young pastors perhaps to learn. On the edge of Washington, D.C. was a German Lutheran home, very large nursing home, essentially. They had rehab and stuff like that in there, but it was mostly a nursing home. And we had members from our congregation that were in there, and I had visited there 2, maybe 3 times. And one of those times that I visited, one of the nurses grabbed me as I was leaving. She said, are you a Lutheran pastor? I said, yes, I am. She said, well, we have a Lutheran woman here that's all we know about her. She's had no visitors. She doesn't speak. And so we just don't know anything about her. Would you visit with her and give her communion? I guess, yeah. So they put me in a room, they wheeled this woman in, and I sat there then for a moment as a young pastor saying, well, I have communion, and I really don't know if I should give it to her or not. Is she aware enough to receive communion? But something came to me. Now, I'm not talking about a voice of God in my head or anything like that. Something came to me and said, Newhart, that's not your job. Your job is to present the sacrament. That's your job, and let God do the work. So I opened up my kit. I lay out a nice linen cloth. I take my silver plate out and lay it out. And this woman who's sitting here going like this starts opening up her eyes and watching me. I take out a chalice, set that up, and she looks. I bring out a wafer and put it on the plate. Start to pour the wine, and she says, Ach, das heilige Abendmahl. Ach, das heilige Abendmahl. Which in German means, oh, the Holy Supper. Heilige Abendmahl. And I was just stunned. And when I'm done, she's taking hold of my hand, kissing my hand, thanking me over and over and over again. She couldn't thank me enough for doing this. So I put my stuff away, and now I'm wheeling her out to the nurse's station. And the nurses see this woman now sitting up and all bright. And I said, you got to know this woman talks German. That's why she hasn't spoken to you. There's got to be someone here at the German Lutheran home that can speak German to her. I said, yes, they could. So to me, it was an incredibly enlightening thing for a young pastor. The most important thing that I learned was that you don't control that, God controls that. And if I never would have just laid that out before, this woman would never have come to life in the way that she did. So I left there and I went up to a parish way up in northern Pennsylvania, right on the border, called Sayre, Pennsylvania. And had some interesting times there as well. It was a small town that was very much made up of Pennsylvania Dutchmen from the Lehigh Valley, because it was the end of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. All of their shops were there. They used to have the shops had repaired the engines, but they stopped repairing engines there. They just repaired all their cars, and it was huge repair place. And so there were many people in the congregation who were railroaders, and a lot of people originally from the High Valley that were there as well. It was kind of an interesting time. I had a young couple that became members of the congregation, and they had a young son at the time. He was about 2 years old. Nice kid, and he didn't live too far from the church. And so I'd go by and watch him work on his dirt bikes and stuff like that. And we'd have a couple beers and chat. And maybe like once a week, his wife would have me in for dinner. We just became very close friends. And one night, and the only reason I remember this so well was it was the night that I became engaged to my wife. I got a call, and it was John who said to me, "I don't know if Brandon's alive or dead, but will you please pray for him?" And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, he was sick, and the ambulance." I said, "Did you call the ambulance?" "Yes, it's on its way." I said, "Okay." I said, "I could be in my prayers. I will meet you over at the hospital." The hospital was a 10-minute walk from my house, so I could walk down there. I did try, but I could walk. The ambulance came in with no siren, no thing going, and realized he must have died. And so, of course, they brought him in. I talked to the doctor that was there to receive him. I said, "Can I have a minute or two alone with him?" And I did. I had prayers. I have often said the longest walk I ever took in my life was that walk from my car to their front door, because I just walked on those stones and can still feel and hear the crunch of the stones underneath my feet. I had no idea what to say or what to do. He had meningitis, one of those rare forms of meningitis that just like that took his life. And so anyway, what I learned out of that was too that it isn't what you say, it's your presence. You're the pastor. You need to show them that you care. And if you cry with them, that's all right, because they need to cry, you need to cry. Now my big problem was, what am I going to do in this sermon? What am I going to preach for this funeral? And I was really, really very troubled by all that. And it finally came to me that we measure life by its length, by its years. But God doesn't measure our life that way. He measures our life by our character, by our quality of life. And this kid had a quality of life that was incredible. That's what I finally then centered on in the sermon. It is not the length of our years, it is the quality of our years, not quantity, but quality that God counts on. And I think that was another good lesson for a young pastor to learn. So I continued there and left there. Interestingly enough, got a lead for a parish down just outside of Harrisburg in a little town called Middletown, Pennsylvania. And my wife and I talked about it. And it was a very large parish. And so we talked about it and said, "Do you want to make this kind of a step from up here to all the way down there?" It took us in another synod and everything. So I said, "I'm up for it. I would really like to make the change." And she said, "Yes." We went, and I was interviewed a few times. And then, believe it or not, the TMI accident happened. 3 Mile Island nuclear accident happened. And there, as I recall, they told us they had like 10 people that they were interviewing, and those 10 went down to 5, and those 5 went down to 3. So there were only 3 of us left to interview for the position.